Welcome, folks. Welcome to Fabric of Folklore. I am your host, Vanessa Y. Rogers, and your weekly dose of folklore. In this podcast, we explore all folklore, folk tales, rituals, customs, traditions, and their meanings and importance. And that's what really distinguishes us, our podcast, from other podcasts. We dive deep into these topics to get at the heart of folklore. These topics are not only fun, but they inform us of the world and our place in the world. Understanding folklore helps us to become better world citizens. And if nothing else, it makes for fascinating dinner table conversation. Today, we are diving into the world of traditional dance. Traditions help tie us to the people in our community. They help us feel like we belong and fit in. Traditional dances keep the culture and history alive and celebrate community. So if this sounds like a podcast that you're interested in, definitely like and subscribe right now. And our guest is Dr. Norma Elia Cantu, and she's a folklorist and distinguished professor of humanities in modern languages and literature at Trinity University. She was born in Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas, and raised in Laredo, Texas. Did I say that right?
Tamaulipas.
Okay. She focuses on issues of border through the Chicano feminist lens. And today she's going to be talking about a traditional ancient dance that spans continents and goes back centuries. It's a Catholic folk dance, but one of the only dances performed by Native Americans and Hispanics. And the dance is called Matachines. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Cantu.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I've been studying Matachines. I have known about Matachines all my life, but studying them as a folk tradition is more recent, obviously. And I first got into it, I don't know, how about in the 80s, early 80s? Actually, probably late 70s, because I was researching my other folklore topic, which is pastorelas. That was my dissertation.
Okay, wonderful. Well, let's step back a minute, and I want to hear about how you became a folklorist. How did you hear about the profession of folklorist and, your journey into that world?
Yeah, it's it just happenstance. I like to say that I was a folklorist at age 5 or 6 when my grandmother started teaching me the names of the hierbitas that she grew in her backyard for folk healing, and all the practices, the folk traditional practices in my neighborhood. So I was always very observant and curious about all of that. So I was a folklorist, and I am not a trained, in quotes, folklorist in as much as I don't have a PhD in folklore, which you can, but I don't. I instead came about it through English. My English class as an undergraduate collected children's folklore, and my very first publication as such was when I was an undergraduate. My professor, Alan Briggs, in English, and a Spanish professor, Alfredo Supervielle, were the ones doing the research and collecting all these dichos and nursery rhymes, all kinds of stuff. And I was the one translating and putting it into a book. As an undergrad, that was my entry into the field, if you will. I continued the interest through my master's program, but I focused more on language, literary folklore, if you will, and I didn't even call it that at the time. And it was when I was in my doctoral work that I discovered, in quotes again, because it'd been there all along in my life, the pastorela, a shepherd's play. That was in the villas, in the community. It's in the people's tradition. And then I got a Fulbright to go to Spain to look at the origins of this incredible folk play. The one I researched took 7 hours to perform because,
goodness.
Like many folk traditions, it doesn't exist as performance, but as prayer. And so it's a Christmas play, but it goes on and on and on. It has songs, all kinds of things. So that was kind of how I became a folklorist, like say unintentionally, because I don't have a degree in folklore, but
Uh-huh.
doing folklore work all that time.
Right.
And I guess the culmination was being elected to be the president of the American Folklore Society. To me,
That's amazing. That's amazing, especially since you don't have a PhD in it, but obviously you've been doing work in it. So that's wonderful that they recognized that you don't have to have a PhD in order to, have a lot of work under your belt
and be a folklorist.
That's right.
And I'm still doing that. My next book, one of my, in fact, I have a meeting later tonight with my co-editor. We're doing a book on Folklorico dance.
Okay, and what is that book?
It's called Folklorico Dance Traditions in the United States, Identity, and something else. I don't remember. But we're just, that may not end up being the title, but we're collecting the essays. We had a one-day symposium at Trinity University in San Antonio, and it was on the Folklorico and the impact of Folklorico dance in our communities.
Oh, wow. And so y'all are collecting the essays from that symposium and putting it into a book?
In addition to a couple of others that have come in afterwards. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So we don't have a link for that yet, but when you do have it published, we'll have you come back on and you can talk about it.
You may want to link Chicano Traditions. That's a whole book that came out as an anthology as well on different folk traditions with Chicanas. Olga Nájera Ramirez and I co-edited that book. It's out of University of Illinois, and it's really it's dated now because it was a long time ago that we put it out. But the essays are just as vital, I think. It's called Chicano Traditions, Continuity and Change. And another book out of the same university press that Olga and another scholar, Brenda Romero, and I co-edited is Dancing Across Borders. And that's where I have some of my Matachines work published.
Okay, wonderful. Well, and so on your website, and I was reading through your bio, I read that this is a quote from your bio. I passionately believe that words have power and that literature has the potential to create the change we need. I work with my students to use the power of their stories and their words to create a better world for all sentient beings. Can you talk a little bit to this? Because when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, that's just such a wonderful thing that you're doing. It just really spoke to my heart.
Well, I didn't think about that when I wrote that for the website, the university website, but I do believe it, and I have practiced it all these many years. I've been teaching for about 50 years at the university level, and my students, I think it is empowering to have a voice, to have your stories, and to share those through writing or orally. And the power of words, to me, that's one of the givens, and both for ill or for good, because as we know, they can also be used to cause harm. But I think if we con conciencia, with an awareness, we can use our words to heal, to create change, to make things better. And I do say all sentient beings, including non-human animals, so that we are all on this planet together, and we can all learn from each other and be with each other at peace.
Well, that was just a beautiful sentiment. So I would love to be a student in your class. Okay, so let's dive into Matachines. I had never heard of it when you mentioned it to me in our correspondence. So can you give us a brief summary about what the Matachines dance is?
Sure. It goes back over 500 years in the Americas, and there is a dance tradition in Spain as well. One of the things that I did on one of the Fulbrights that I received to Spain was research fiestas in Spain, trying to see a connection between the fiestas that they have there and the ones that we have here in Texas. And sure enough, many of the fiestas have dance as part of their tradition. And in the indigenous in the Americas, it was the indigenous people who had dance as part of their tradition as well. So it was a very natural kind of syncretism that occurs when the Europeans come over here during the conquest. They teach through what is already there and proselytize through what is already there. And one of those traditions is the Matachines. I can trace it all the way back there because there were dances described by the Spaniards that are what we now call Matachines. The word itself has two etymologies. One that I have heard from the Nahuatl, it's the language of the Aztec groups, call it Matlachin with a TL. Whereas the other word that comes from about the 15th century, which makes sense when they first come over here, in Europe through Italian. And the Matachine groups there are actually, they're part of plays that are put on stage, and they come in the intermezzo, in the between different scenes or between different plays. These kind of buffoon characters, clowns, would be on stage jumping and dancing and singing, and they would call Matachines. Now,
it's the clown characters were called Matachines.
Yeah, that intermezzo de Matachines. I read many plays where it would say intermezzo de Matachines. And what it was not a plot or anything. They would just come on stage and do kind of slapstick. That's how they call them. Now, I'm not sure because I can't trace it, but I suspect that the Spanish, when they would see the indigenous people putting on some of these dance traditions, the name stuck. That's what they knew. They put it on there. That's my suspicion. Scholars have debated this. You can read all about the different ways people have tried to find an origin. I don't claim to have found one. I don't know what the origin is. There are multiple variants. We know that. All the way down to Tierra del Fuego and all the way up to Alaska, you will find Matachines.
So Tierra del Fuego in Argentina, in Chile,
in the southern part, yes, and
that's amazing.
The northernmost part of the hemisphere. And that the reason, I think, is that it has that syncretic European and indigenous. So it has music in many cases with violin, guitar, but also drum. In many cases, it's only the drum. So it changes. And then there is a Matachine tradition in New Mexico that has a different, it looks different, it plays different. From my research, I have found three different kinds of main branches of Matachines. De la Pluma, which all have some kind of feather. De la Palma, and they carry in their hand kind of like a trident looking thing. It's like a palm. And De la Flecha, an arrow. And the Flecha is the one group that I work with in Laredo that received the National Heritage Award in 2021, I believe it was, maybe 22. It was during the pandemic, and they didn't get to go to Washington to receive the award. It's the National Center for the Art gives out the Heritage Fellows Awards, and so they didn't. I have been very lucky. I nominated another tradition, a ceramic artist from here in San Antonio. Her name is Veronica Castillo, and she got it in 2013. And she did go to Washington to receive the award. It was very beautiful.
And so are they bestowed like a cash grant, or like what does that award do for them?
Well, for anybody who gets it, it kind of affirms their position in the community as master storyteller, master basket weaver, because indigenous communities value and treasure that craft, that art, master dance tradition. And it's an award. I'll send you a link for that as well, because there's a clip. The year they won, we couldn't go to DC, so they sent a crew from Austin to film them, and then they put it together on a national broadcast about the Matachines. And it's a
That's
beautiful,
nice.
short little piece, but it tells you the information. Anyway, what I was saying about how I started working with Matachines, when I did my research for my dissertation on the shepherd's play, I was interviewing people doing my ethnographic research in Laredo.
Mm-hmm.
Laredo is my hometown, Laredo, Texas. And everybody kept talking about the Matachines. And of course, I knew the tradition, but it wasn't a play that I could link to the shepherd's play. So I just kind of put it on the side. As soon as I did all of that in 82, I finished my dissertation, got my degree. I came back to the Matachines, and I have been going ever since.
Okay. So can you step back and talk a little bit about the different ideas of the origins? Because you said there's a lot of debate around where the origins are. So what are the different ideas of where it came from and how it penetrated so far?
Yeah. Actually, I'm going to be doing a workshop on Saturday, the 28th, I think it is, the 29th in the morning with local Matachine groups. And the reason is the woman who contacted me, she said, we want to know our origin because we have the tradition, we dance, but we don't know the history. So I am going to, what I'm going to tell you is part of what I'm going to talk about, because it does have the two very strong fuentes, the sources. One is the European and the other is the indigenous. And the debate, I guess, comes as to which is first. Which is the first one. I don't have an answer for that. I can tell you how the music in some groups is very European with a violin and the guitar. And in other groups, it's very indigenous. All they have is drums. So that I know, and you can trace it through the music. There is no text. There's no verbal script that they actually speak. But in the dance, there are plots and scenes that are enacted. In some of them, there's a character named La Malinche, which goes back to Mexican history, and also El Viejo. Interesting point, El Viejo is an old man, and he appears in the pastorela as the same character as such as the hermit, El Ermitaño. So to me, that was really fascinating. But it's not surprising.
There's crossover.
It's not surprising because it's the same people who put on the play. So the same character who plays El Ermitaño in the pastorela turns around and plays El Viejo in the Matachines. Although there he has no voice, there's no words, he just dances. And his role is to disrupt the dance. To kind of
interesting.
Get the Matachines.
Like he's a grumpy old man, and he's like,
well, he's worse.
Get off my lawn.
Oh yeah, he's worse. He carries a baby. It's a doll, and he scares the kids. And he's a disruptive influence. I don't want to say satanic because I don't see it like that. But some people think it is. It's because they're praying. Their dance is prayer, and you have this character interrupting that. And when they do the Danza del Viejo y la Malinche, it's incredible in the group that I work with. They do like a mock killing. And so they all dance around him and with their arrows, snap it. And then he falls and they bring him out. So evil has been defeated.
So is that the main plot line in the dance? Because you said that there are several plots within that one dance.
They have.
So what are some others?
When I started working with them, they had up to 50.
Oh my gosh!
They don't do that many anymore. Some of them have been blended into others, and some of them are the same. They're very long, depending on how many dancers you have. A son. That's each dance can last up to half an hour even. Usually they're 10, 15 minutes. And there's another one called La Encrucijada, which means the crossroads. As they're dancing, they cross each other as they approach the cross. They dance in front of a holy cross.
Uh-huh.
The Matachines from Laredo honor the Holy Cross. Many, many, many groups in Mexico and everywhere, Dallas, Houston, Missouri. I lived in Kansas City. I documented 10 different groups of Matachines in Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas. I was shocked, but they all honor
Wow.
the Virgen de Guadalupe. So starting December 1st, they start dancing every night in honor of the Virgen. And the big celebration is December 11th.
Oh, so that's 10 days in a row, and is it the same dancers over and over?
Uh-huh. Not always the same sones, but it's the same dancers, the same musicians, the same music. Yeah.
And do they have an audience that comes out for this?
Usually it's the family members during the week.
Mm-hmm.
If your kid's dancing, you're going to be there. Sometimes whole families are dancing together in the procession. They do a procession in some cases. I'll tell you a story. I had been living in Missouri, in Kansas City. I was at the University of Missouri in Kansas City for about 4 years. And it was the first year. And someone had recommended a Mexican restaurant. So we went over to the Mexican area in Kansas City, Kansas. And we're sitting there at El Torito restaurant. And I start hearing the drum. And I tell Elia, I said, those are Matachines. I can't believe it. And they're getting closer. So I go outside. It's cold. It's December in Kansas City. And there they are. They're in procession dancing to the church. And that was only one group. And then I started asking. One of my students had been a dancer in a group. Another one, her parents were members. And then I started interviewing. And in 2017, when I went back to actually document the tradition, there were 10 different groups that I had documented.
That's
and like
wild.
That, you will find them in Chicago. You will find them in Washington, D.C., almost anywhere where you have the area or what Americo Paredes, probably the grandfather of Chicano folklore, he called it Greater Mexico. Not just the nation state of Mexico, but wherever Mexicans are,
right?
It's Greater Mexico. So wherever there is a Mexican community, you're going to find Matachines. Often linked to the church, but not always.
Right. Okay, so yeah, that was my next question. Are they, since they are doing a procession oftentimes to a church, are they sponsored by churches? How large are these groups as well?
Sometimes a parish will have a local group that dances only there, although most groups don't just stick to the church. They dance in people's backyards. I have been to Matachine celebrations when somebody paid off a mortgage. And to celebrate, they brought in a Matachine group. There's all over in Laredo especially, but elsewhere, here in San Antonio, communities, smaller communities, not just a church community, but, a barrio. They will have an altar set up for the Virgen in their front yard, and they'll invite Matachines to come dance for her. And it is sponsored, in quotes, by a lot of churches where there's a Mexican community that's been there historically, like in Kansas City, Kansas, and in Kansas City, Missouri. But there are also groups that don't have an affiliation with any church. They're just their own group. And they have their leaders, the capitanes and mayordomos. And so they organize themselves around. It's faith-based. It's a faith-based tradition, which means that many people vow, they promise God or the Virgin Mary that they will dance for if somebody is cured from cancer, or if somebody who has been away returns home. There's all kinds of reasons why people make promesas. They promise to dance. They make vows, and then they honor by dancing. That happens quite a bit. I have a book I'm working on. It's been in the works for many years, but a whole chapter on promesas, because it is faith-based.
So are they mostly Catholic dancers? Catholic religion?
Mostly, I don't know of any particular group that is not Catholic, but I wouldn't doubt it that there are people dancing who don't consider themselves Catholic. And the reason I say that is because of other traditions like the quinceañera. Quinceañera is a celebration that happens when a young woman turns 15. And it's mostly Catholic. There's a mass. But I have been to quinceañeras that are not. They're non-denominational, or maybe even other traditions, Jewish, when they honor the 15th. They mark the coming of age at age 15, and they'll have a celebration. Now, in the Jewish tradition, you have a bat mitzvah, but it's slightly different. I mean, they're also marking a coming of age. But then if you're a Mexican Jewish community, you might have a quinceañera too.
Why not? The more parties, the better, right?
That's right.
Well, can you talk a little bit more, since you said you have an entire chapter that's devoted to promesas, can you talk a little bit more about like the importance of them, or I don't know, what is
well, a lot of folk traditions, in my view, fulfill needs of people, and that's why they're still around. And one of the needs, I think, as a faith belief that the Matachines provide is a space for a person to, in gratitude, do something above and beyond the normal everyday stuff. And prayer is a strong one. And if you pray dancing, it's even stronger. And I have seen dancers who dance barefoot as part of that sacrifice. Some dancers promise or vow to dance 5 years, some for life. They dance until they no longer can physically do it.
So let's give an example. If I wanted, like, if, for instance, like if I have cancer and I say I'm going to do, I at the end, if I don't have cancer at the end, do I hire Matachines? Can I dance with them? How does that work?
I've seen both. Yeah, you don't necessarily hire, but you ask the community. It's a very close community. Everybody knows each other. They help each other with the dress, the nahuilla, and the vest that they wear, the embroidery. It's communal. And so somebody had diabetes and was going to get a leg amputated, prayed to the Holy Cross, promised that if that didn't happen, they would dance for 3 years. And it didn't happen. The doctors figured out a way not to do it, and the person danced for 3 years. Another one, it was a family, their daughter had been very, very sick in Laredo. They didn't know what was going on. They brought her to San Antonio, flew her actually over here, and treated what was wrong. They found out, they were able to heal her. The mother vowed that the child and she would dance. And they both danced. I saw them dancing together. And this was several years ago. This young child is now married and has children. And she's no longer dancing, but that was her vow at that point. The mother vowed for that. And the mother is always just saying, it was the Holy Cross, because I prayed to the Holy Cross.
Now, I have a question about that, because I had read that in some traditions, women are not allowed to participate. Does it depend on the community?
Yeah, that was true of the Matachines in Laredo that I work with. Up until the 60s, only men danced. And I have some historical photographs where it shows only the men are dancing, or only there. There were little girls who had just done their first communion who were allowed to be in procession, but they were not Matachine dancers. Now, in New Mexico, the dancers are all male. They only have the Malinche, the little girl, who's female and dances with them. And like I said, they're different traditions. They're both called Matachines. But if you see the two, they're like almost polar opposites of what it is.
Oh, how so? How are they?
Well,
How are
like
they
the
so different?
men and women dance,
Oh.
and they wear red,
Mm-hmm.
and the way they're dressed, the music, everything is Matachines in Texas, in South Texas, or in Mexico.
Uh-huh.
And if you go to New Mexico, the Matachines in Bernalillo, for example, it's all men dancers, although there are some uh, people who are wanting to change that. And then the little girl is the female, La Malinche, they call her. And so that tradition is like that. And they don't dance in the church. Well, maybe they have now, but when I did the research there, they were dancing in people's homes. They would set up the dance space in somebody's yard. And that's where everybody came for the celebration.
So talk about the different costumes.
We don't call them
for different
costumes.
groups.
We call them traditional dress because costume implies that it's performance, and for them it's not. It's
right, because it's
prayer. And so the traditional dress also varies. Some of them wear a headpiece called a cupil. A cupil is also like a bishop's mitre, the thing that goes up like that. Others wear indigenous, like the head dress with the feathers. I've seen that too. That's borrowed because that's more of North American native tradition, not this tradition in Mexico. And then I've also seen just a red band tied up like that the dancers will wear. The colors of the Laredo group are red and yellow, mostly red. But I have seen others. There's another group here in San Antonio that wears blue. And I think it's because of the Virgin Mary, because it's Mary, although it's Guadalupe. But they wear blue instead. I think they're the group out of Misión Concepción. The mission has its own group there. There's a
I was wondering about that.
Yeah, and there's a group that was followed by this young man, Robert Botello, I think is his name, and he wrote a book about it. It's a group here in San Antonio, and it's not affiliated with the church, and they dance on Dia de la Virgen de Guadalupe, and they dress with red. And so, red is the predominant color in the groups that I have observed in most of Mexico. But like I said, there's like little trinkets. Groups here and there. I'm sorry?
They have like things on their traditional dress that make noise. Is that right?
Yes, they embroider with sequins. And it's really beautiful when you see it with the light shining on it. And it has designs and motifs from religion. They have a cross. They sometimes get these appliques and they put them on there. The noisemaker, the skirt, the nahuilla, is embroidered. I wish I had one here to show you, but you're going to link it so people can see that.
Yeah.
It has...
you can send us pictures and we'll put them up.
Good. It's about 6-inch reeds. They cut them from the carrizo that they get from the river, and then they string it with jingle bells. So when they're dancing, you hear this beautiful sound that it makes. When I was a kid, they didn't have jingle bells. What they did is they would flatten the bottle caps and string the bottle caps together, and it made it also a really interesting sound.
Yeah, I would imagine. Do you remember one of your first reactions to the dances as a little kid? Do you remember having a reaction?
I wrote about it in my novel in Canicula. It was scary. Because,
really?
Well, there are all these things, noise, the viejo with the baby going around. And it was like, oh my God, what's going on? I was 3, 4, 5 years old. But of course, later it's not. And the kids who are learning to dance, they start learning around 5 or 6. And that's new too. Not all groups allow children to dance.
But some newer ones do, or more
the
modern
ones.
The ones
in Laredo do, and usually it's the mother who's dancing and the child is next to her. And I have seen that in powwows with Native American groups, that the older dancers have their children with them also dancing. They're learning the tradition.
To start including them. Yeah, that's beautiful. And so the dancers themselves, do they speak about their experience as a dancer? Do they have, is it a special experience for them? Do they have
Oh, yes.
profound moments?
Well, almost all of the dancers that I have worked with have inherited from parents and grandparents and great grandparents. So it's pretty much like that. But there are some people who learn it as adults. They join the group and start dancing. So they come at it from a different perspective. But yeah, they are introspective about the value of the devotion more than anything, the devotion to the Holy Cross.
And do you have a sense that this tradition is gaining speed or it's being lost? Or
and that's a good question. At this point, I think in the group, like the one in Laredo, I see it declining a little bit. Not as many of the younger kids are dancing, but I've seen that before. And then the kids grow up, and then they are interested again, and they come back to me. So we'll see about that. The groups here in San Antonio, I think, have a lot of new younger kids dancing, mostly teenagers, which I think is beautiful. Because like I said earlier, it fulfills a need. So there's a need in their heart, in their soul for this community. And they find it in that. And I think that...
Can you speak to that community? Like you said that there's people know each other and they just invite the Matachines into their home or share their backyard. And there's people who are helping create these elaborate outfits, the traditional dresses. And so it seems to bind people together a bit more.
Yeah, I call it a social glue. Because it does. It brings people together. It's a community, different families that have been involved for generations. You know, the grandparents were friends, and the parents were friends, and they're friends, and the kids are friends. And it all kind of, there's a cohesion there of the group that occurs. I'm not sure that I'm not a sociologist. I don't know the language to use for what is happening. But I observe it, and I can tell you it's always rewarding. It just warms my heart when I go to I'm going to go in May. I have an exam on May 4th, and they're dancing. The day of the cross is the 3rd. So I'm not sure how I'm going to make it, but I'm going to go. And then they'll probably dance all weekend, because I think the 3rd is like a Wednesday or something. So they'll dance throughout the weekend and go in procession to the church. It'll be the first time that they're actually full force back in person. The last
since
3
COVID.
years, because of COVID, it has been limited.
And so is this in other groups as well? Are other groups doing it in May as well? What's the special significance
No, most
to May
groups
3rd?
do it December for the Virgen de Guadalupe. But for the group in Laredo that I work with, it's the Holy Cross, the day of the Holy Cross. There used to be 2 groups, because the group moved from the mining area of the coal mines along the river, and they moved to Laredo in 1938. But there were 2 groups. One group came earlier, and then another group. And now they're both together. The Matachines de la Santa Cruz de la Ladrillera, they called it, is the one that's still there. And the other group was at another church, at Mother Cabrini Church. But that group has dissolved, and many of the dancers joined the Santa Cruz group.
In the video that you sent, and they had a maypole. I found that really fascinating, because I felt like that seemed out of place to me, because I've never actually seen a maypole in an actual festival, but I associate it with, Northern Europe. So
yeah,
do you know where that came from?
The syncretism from European and indigenous. I don't know. They don't do it anymore. That's one of the sones that I haven't seen in the last 8-9 years. They used to do it every year, and then they stopped. I'm not sure why. I haven't really asked. It was a time when I stopped going when I was in Kansas City, and then came back, and it's no longer happening. And the dancers trained, they practiced, they rehearsed doing that. I think they did it once here in San Antonio at what was at the Folkloric Festival, the Texas
Mm-hmm.
Folkloric Festival. They did it for that. And so, yeah, it was part of their, what do we call it? Their uh, the list of dances that they would perform. And now that's
Mm-hmm.
not there. There are a couple of others. Like I said, there were 50, and now they're down to maybe 10 or 15.
Because how long will these take? I mean, because if you're saying that they're 30 minutes each, on average, that would
They
be
dance
several
all day.
hours.
Yeah, they dance all day. They break for lunch, and then they'll break for dinner. But they'll dance from like 9 in the morning until 12 at night.
That just seems so exhausting.
It
And
is.
not all of them are young. A lot of them are older.
Yeah. And that's one reason I think that it's because they're all older and can't dance anymore. That's one of the reasons I'm seeing a decline. But like I said, some of the younger dancers that stop coming will come back.
Mm-hmm. Because they feel that pull to figure out their roots. Well, is there anything that we haven't covered that you think is important about the Matachines?
We could talk for hours. There's so much. It's a beautiful community. It's a beautiful tradition. I see it surviving because of the need that it fulfills. And I really think, especially the devotion to the Virgin Mary, to Virgen de Guadalupe, that's going to sustain it. In many, many instances, the young people are dancing for the Virgin. Yeah. And the Virgen de Guadalupe as a symbol of Mexicanness, but also of that it doesn't know borders. It crosses borders. And like I was saying, it's all over the hemisphere. Not all of them dance for the Virgen de Guadalupe, obviously. I saw some groups in Albuquerque and in Tucson, and they weren't dancing for Guadalupe. They had their own. In Bernalillo, New Mexico, it was, what's the saint in August? It's a saint, not Lazaro. I can't remember. Can't remember right now, but it's a saint whose feast day is in August. And I went to the celebration in Bernalillo. Very different, like I said. But there's another town in New Mexico, Tortugas, New Mexico, where they dance one that is very similar to the one in San Antonio and in Laredo. So they're different groups that I've been able to identify. So I have hope. I'm an optimist that the tradition will survive. You know, folklore doesn't die. It just changes. The tradition has changed. It's not what it used to be. And it has survived. It will survive.
And that change is not necessarily bad. It's good because it changes with the people.
Yeah, like I think the addition of women dancers was a big change. There was a lot of controversy at the time, but it really has helped the tradition survive.
And I love that they include their children in the dance as well. I would imagine that those mothers, though, would not be able to do the whole day long with their children. I would imagine those kids would not be able to last.
And it's not usually the same people doing the whole dance all the way through. There's different groups that come and go.
Well, that's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we will definitely be adding those links to our website, which is www.fabricoffolklore.com. We talked about so many, so we'll have to figure out what all we talked about to make sure we add them all.
Anytime. And I'll send you the links also to the novels. My novel in Spain is about the fiestas in Spain. So there's a lot of folklore there. I guess I've overlapped the literary and the folklore into my work. So I'll send you links.
Well, and I think that's natural. I find that a lot of folklorists, well, I've been told that a lot of folklorists end up becoming writers because, you know, they are so interested and fascinated by story, and they want to continue the tradition in their own words.
Right.
And as you said before, words have power.
I can attest to that. Thank you so much, Vanessa. And I'm so glad you're doing this podcast. I really think it's a service to the field of folklore and to get the word out, to get others interested in being folklorists. I became a folklorist by chance, but I remain a folklorist because I love it and I love people and I really believe in the power of stories.
Well, and I think that people are searching for connection, and I think folklore is a way to find that connection, because it's all about finding your roots, as you know, and your roots can be in lots of different places. It doesn't just have to be your specific heritage. You know, there's lots of different ways to find those roots, and I think exploring that is really, really important.
I agree. Thank you.
Thanks. And thank you, folks and folks, for listening today. And like we said, everything will be on our website, which is www.fabricoffolklore.com. And have you, before we spoke about this, had you heard about the Matachines Dance? Have you seen them perform? Do you do a traditional dance yourself? And what does it mean to you? Please let us know on our Facebook community page, which is called Fabric of Folklore Community. We really want to hear from you, because we want to hear more about what you want to learn about and what interests you, what roots are important to you. So one of the things that you can do to help us the most is by telling someone about our podcast. If that means having a giant sign printed out and twirling it around in the air, then that's what you should do. Although, honestly, I never find that very effective because I never can read what is on that sign. So that's not really what I would suggest you do. But maybe if your cubicle buddy pokes their head in and says, I'm bored, tell them about the new podcast that you're listening to, Fabric of Folklore. It's different than most of the other podcasts that you're listening to. So writing us a review, subscribing, commenting, liking, and giving us all the stars, especially if you're on iTunes, that is super helpful, and we will love you forever. So thank you for unraveling the mysteries of folklore on the Fabric of Folklore. And until next time, keep the folk alive.